This is an I Am Listening original podcast.
In a sense, although there are several parties, and that is how politics has changed over the last 40 years, although there's several parties, there's actually two strains of ideology, to the right and to the left. But there are various options as to where you go to on the right and where you go to on the left.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast, your go-to source for insightful discussions on local and national political matters. Join us as we take a deep dive into local government across the county. Find out what the key decision makers have to say, what your money is being spent on, and how the party's policies could affect how we live. Plus, don't miss our regular feature, Westminster Watch, where we dissect the latest developments and decisions shaping the political landscape in the heart of the UK's capital. Engage with us as we delve into the issues that matter to you and explore the dynamic world of politics from a Kent perspective.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast. In the week, a Kent Online investigation revealed £20 million of funding for public services has gone unspent for years. There was another twist in our story about the plans to turn a former Premier Inn into homes. And what's next for the long-running saga of a major road closed after a landslip? I'm Simon Finney, the local democracy reporter covering Kent County Council, and I'm joined by Robert Boddy, who reports on Medway Council.
Hello.
And Dan Esson, who reports on the Borough and District Councils in Kent.
Hello.
And Nikki White, who's looking at what's been happening at Westminster.
Hello.
And we'll be catching up later with the stalwart of Kent politics, Roger Truelove, a former Borough Council leader, KCC councillor and parliamentary candidate. First up, it's Robert. What's been going on in Medway this week?
I've been working on something for a while now about Section 106 payments, which are contributions from developers which are agreed when a planning application is given permission. They're supposed to mitigate the impact of a development by providing funding for projects in education, health, open spaces, but I've been looking into how much of this is actually getting spent, specifically in the realms of health.
Yeah, Section 106. What have you found then?
So, Freedom of Information requests, which we submitted, found in total nearly £20 million of Section 106 contributions collected by Medway Council is sitting unspent, and of £1.2 million which was collected for health agreements since 2013, only £17,000 has been spent. Now, while some are smaller sums, a couple of thousand, some reach up to over £100,000, and they're allocated for specific things, so often particular GP services within a radius of the development or a healthy living centre are named in the agreements. It does take time for the money to be collected, as the sums are only received by the council once a trigger point has been reached. But once the council has it, as in the case of the figures I've been talking about, there is a ticking clock on when it has to be used by, ranging between 5 and 10 years, where if it's not used by then, the developers can request that money back.
So, the all important question, I guess, is, why is it not being spent?
It's not totally clear. For some areas, education, infrastructure, the Section 106 money does tend to get used, but in health, it's almost entirely unspent. The council can't spend it itself, as the services are run by NHS Kent and Medway Integrated Care Board, so the ICB has to request this money to spend. The ICB says it takes time to spend the funds, and sometimes money is collected together to be used on larger projects. But when I asked about a specific instance of £33,000, which was collected in 2017, and if there really wasn't anything worth using that money for in the past 8 years, they said they regularly review Section 106 funding and look for ways that it can be used.
OK, thanks, Rob. Dan, what have you been looking at?
So I've been following on from a story that our colleague local democracy reporter Gabriel did a few months about the conversion of a former Premier Inn in Gravesend into a 46-bedroom HMO, which caused quite a bit of consternation.
So what was the problem with it?
So way back in December, Gabriel saw that rooms in the former Premier Inn in Singlewell were being advertised as studio apartments up for rent at about £750 a month each, not including bills. He looked into it and basically found out that it was unclear whether or not they actually had planning permission to do that, and it was still legally classed as a hotel. So basically the owners of this former Premier Inn have been sat in the planning limbo for quite a few months now.
Okay, so what's changed?
So essentially, the developers tell me that they received erroneous advice from their planning consultant, which said that you could rent out rooms in a former hotel like that while it was still legally licensed as a hotel. Basically, them in Gravesend Borough Council have come to an understanding that is not the case. So some of the rooms are currently rented out, and in the meantime, they've put in an application for an extension to bring it up to 46 bedrooms, and it will be run basically like a HMO with some live-in staff.
So Simon, what have you been working on this week?
My colleague Gabriel and I put together a package to mark the second anniversary of the road collapse at Galley Hill Road in Swanscombe. Just to recap, the chalk cliff which supports Galley Hill Road suddenly gave way on April the 10th, 2023, and hundreds of tons of chalk sheared off and took about a third of the road with it. Mercifully, no one died, either on or above the 140 feet cliff. The precise reason for the collapse isn't known, but we spoke to local people and businesses 2 years on and asked how this has affected them and gauged their reactions to the news, and that any fix will take 3 years minimum to put in place and will require a government loan to fund it.
What is the mood?
I think it's fair to say that most people have got used to the fact that the road is closed and it's just causing them a lot of inconvenience. So it gets a sort of a feeling of grim resignation around Swanscombe. We also spoke to one of the managers at Landsbox, which is the demolition firm that was hit by the majority of the weight of this landslip. And they said that if it hadn't been a bank holiday Monday, one of the staffers would almost have been directly underneath that fall. So there are some mercies in all of it. That's a small mercy, but it's been very, very costly and massively inconvenient to them running the business.
Are there any updates?
Yeah, and my colleague Gabriel has been in touch with the local MP Jim Dixon and he has a meeting next week with the Roads Minister Lillian Greenwood and to see if there's any movement on that government loan, which would either pay for a bridge or an earth embankment to get it back open again. But as I said earlier, it's going to take at least 3 years. That's from the moment they get permission to do it, at least 3 years. Mr Dixon said that when he came into office last July, that was the top of his priority list. So, Nikki, what's been keeping our MPs busy this week?
So, while many of us are now switching off our heating and wanting to forget about energy prices until winter returns, now is actually the time to be thinking about them more than ever. Gas and electricity bills went up for millions of households on the 1st of April when the latest energy price cap took effect. It means now that the annual bill for a household using a typical amount of gas and electricity has now risen to £1,849 a year. That's an increase of £111. So we do have the energy price cap, which sets the maximum amount customers can be charged for each unit of energy, but your actual bill will obviously depend on how much gas and electricity you use. Experts are predicting that the price cap could fall back again in July, but checking you're on the best deal possible is always a good thing to do anyway. However, even if you do that, paying the bills isn't always that easy, as we know, and many people are still left struggling to find the money. East Thanet MP Polly Billington, she wants to change that and has launched a campaign for the government to introduce something called a social tariff on energy bills to help protect the poorest and most vulnerable households.
So what would that mean then, Nikki?
So a social tariff would see energy companies forced to provide a low tariff for all energy for vulnerable customers and also protect them from the impact of rising prices. Miss Billington said that the aim is to work towards a switch away from fossil fuels where the prices are dictated by those countries which have them, such as Russia. And what we're trying to do is move to cheaper homegrown renewable energy. But in the meantime, she wants to see more done to support the most vulnerable households. Now, she said that in her own constituency of Thanet, there's a quarter of all working age adults claiming universal credit, and more than 40% of people claim at least one form of benefit. They often have to choose between heating and eating, and that, she said, is quite simply wrong. She said that she'd like to see the social tariff targeted at people who are on benefits, but also those who are in fuel poverty. Now, the bill is still at a very early stage and has a long way to go before it might become a reality. But with the issue a nationwide one, I suspect it's likely to pick up a lot of support.
OK, thank you.
Is there a topic that you would like to be discussed on the Kent Politics podcast? Perhaps you've got a question for one of our panel, or you'd like to comment on a hot topic in local or national government. Get in touch by emailing or sending a voice note to kentpoliticspodcast@thekmgroup.co.uk.
This week's guest is a veteran of local government, having been a borough and a county councillor, a cabinet member, opposition leader and a council leader. Labour's Roger Truelove is also a political author who twice stood for Parliament, but for the Liberal Democrats rather than his own current party. He grew up in Woolwich and ended up in Oxford University before being a teacher. He later became the agent and close aide to the former MP Derek Wyatt, and now he joins us on the Kent Politics podcast. Roger, thank you for coming.
Hello.
So if we start at the beginning, like I said, you were born in Woolwich. How did you end up in Kent and in Kent politics?
Well, we came to Kent because we had teaching jobs here, Also, I just love Kent. I played youth cricket for Kent, so I'd spent many years coming down here to watch county cricket and also playing down here. So we kind of attracted to Kent anyway. We moved first of all to Sheppey, and I knew Sheppey quite well from my youth as well. And then we moved to Sittingbourne, and I had a job that took me to Bromley, and Christine had a job that kept her in Sittingbourne. So we stayed there, and we've stayed there ever since.
I see. And so how did you end up in politics, and why did you start off in what was then the Liberal Party?
Right. Well, I'd always been interested in politics. I actually went to a public meeting about the Suez Crisis in 1956 when I was 10 years old, and I was, by some distance, the youngest there. While I used to follow cricket scores incredibly closely, I also followed the general election of 1955 when I would have been 10 or 11. So I was very interested in politics. But I didn't actually feel that I wanted to join a party because I played a lot of cricket and football. And until Mrs. Thatcher became the Prime Minister, and I felt impelled then that something's got to be done about this. And I looked at the parties, and at that particular time, I was very interested in proportional representation. I was very interested in us being in the European Union, and I was very interested in environmental matters. So although I'd always been a Labour sympathiser, it seemed more reasonable at that time to join the Liberals. And I was in the Liberal Party, and then it became the Liberal Democrats for 17 years. And that's how I stood for Parliament in 92 and 97. And then I stopped being an active politician, became friends with Derek Wyatt. He asked me if I'd work for him as a media consultant. And so I joined the Labour Party, and I've been in the Labour Party now for 25 years.
So during that time work, so obviously, just for listeners' sake, Derek Wyatt was the Labour MP for Sittingbourne Sheppey from 97 to 2010?
That's correct.
So in that time, I've heard you're obviously working with an MP who was part of the party of government. I heard you had the odd interaction with both Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. What were they like?
Yes, right. I went to 10 Downing Street, where the Labour Prime Minister is very keen to look after what they regarded as key activists. So we had an evening's entertainment there. We did that with Tony Blair a couple of times, and he was just brilliant at working the room. And he had this distinctive ability to seem as though he was really interested in what you were saying.
Even if he might not be.
Well, he may or not have been, but he was. And then we went up for Gordon Brown as well, and that was much more formal. Shake hands, have a photograph, and depart. But Gordon Brown did come down to Sheppey in the 25 election, and he went to the Children's Centre at Sheerness, and he was actually marvellous. And his empathy with children and with the mothers who were there was quite incredible. And in the end, the mothers realised that we had sure starts because of Gordon Brown. So there was obviously an ability to empathise with him, but there was also a rather formal nature to him as well.
You headed a Rainbow Coalition at Swale Council after many years of Tory rule. That must have been an interesting experience, keeping all the different people with different agendas focused at once.
It required remarkable political and diplomatic skill to do that. It was 5 parties: Labour, Liberal Democrats, Greens. That there's some degree of ideological mixture there, but it was also Swale Independents and Independents, and it worked because we didn't just sort of say, we don't like the Tories, so we'll join together. We did actually spend about a month working out exactly what it was we wanted to do and finding the common ground that we actually had between us for the Swale area. And we sustained that, and we delivered a lot. And as long as we were delivering, everything worked well. There were 1 or 2 upsets, but by and large, it worked very well.
One of the big issues in Swale presently is the 8,000 home Highstead Park development, which is currently being looked at by the government planning inspector. Swale is spending vast sums on opposing the scheme. Where do you stand on Highstead Park?
Well, I have to say, for 25 years, this has been hanging over the southern area of Sittingbourne, and I've always been opposed to it. Whilst we do need new housing, I think the impact on the rural areas of South Sittingbourne would be devastating. I also don't think that particular application is deliverable. It's too complex. And what I fear is if it gets planning permission, then they'll cherry pick bits of it, as often happens. So you may get the housing, but you don't get the new school. You may not get the new road, and maybe the new road won't, if it does happen, doesn't actually meet the needs of the area and the infrastructure of the area. So, I mean, you may ask me next, but your MPs supported it and supported the call-in. Well, we just differ. And the local Labour Party doesn't support that. And the councillors, the Labour councillors on Swale Council don't support it, and neither do the candidates in the election. There's nothing wrong with having a difference of opinion in a political party. It's rather naive and childish to think that people in a political party would always agree. And on this particular thing, we don't actually agree with the MP's position.
Yeah.
But I also think it was going to go there anyway. It didn't really matter. It was going to end up going to the planning inspectorate, either because Swale turned it down and they appealed, or it was called in. Well, it was called in, but there's not much difference. And I would hope the planning inspector will see the flaws in the planning application.
So you, as leader of the Rainbow Coalition at Swale, you have quite a lot of experience in cross-party work, and then you're also active with Compass, an organisation which essentially encourages and makes its mission to lobby for a progressive alliance of Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. Leaving aside the electoral system, do you think there's an extent to which maybe that kind of thing is sort of venerating compromise for its own sake? Surely the point of a party, especially a party like Labour, which, at least at one point claimed to be the voice of the organised working class. Yes. Surely the point of a party is to take power as a majority and to govern in the interests of its base. And, with parties like Liberals, Liberal Democrats, Greens and Labour, they represent or attempt to represent different sort of sections of society. Do you think those parties really can or should work together?
Well, just remember that I have been a member of both the parties, and when I made the transition from one to the other, I didn't find a remarkable difference between them. Both parties are essentially social democratic parties. They actually believe in the ability of government and parliament to intervene, to improve people's lives right across all classes. I don't actually think the class division is quite as distinct as it used to be. I'm not saying that I would rather not have a Labour government. I'd rather have a Labour government. But if we don't have a Labour government, I'd rather have a Labour government with Liberal Democrats than have a Conservative government with Reform. And personally, I was quite disappointed that the Liberal Democrats joined with the Conservatives in 2010. The electoral situation maybe demanded it, but I think that was disappointing because all the time I was in the Liberal Democrats, a sense was that at least 2/3 of them, if they had to have a second party, it would be Labour. It wouldn't be the Conservatives.
So you also consider yourself to be very much of the left. But what do you make of the current Labour government? Because, you say the Labour Party is essentially social democratic, but, it had to be dragged kicking and screaming into nationalising a steel plant, something which would have been considered perfectly normal, acceptable, and the kind of thing Labour members for years have wanted.
In the past, I don't think nationalisation has been part of Clause 4 since Blair's day. I think for any government in any country now, with the intensive scrutiny, goes through really serious periods of unpopularity. And I think that is what is happening to this government. I think they just need to govern. I think one of the real problems with the previous Conservative government was it seemed because of the daily pressure of media and opinion polls that they were fighting the next general election. Every day they get rid of prime ministers, they get rid of so many Chancellor of the Exchequer, you can't count them, and they created an instability and a lack of confidence. I think it's really important, whatever people are saying about the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, that they stick at it. If they don't succeed in the 3 or 4 years that they're in government, not the 3 or 4 months they've been in government or 7 months they've been in government, then people will vote them out. But at this particular point, I can't see that there is actually an alternative, because the Conservative Party is being led very poorly, in my view, and I really don't think that Reform will offer anything other than a protest vote.
Do you think Labour or the Tories, leaving aside the third parties, really have much of a future? Surely the story of British politics over the last 30 years is a is a complete collapse in the traditional support base for the existing parties. Tony Blair being re-elected in 2001 and 5 on horrifically low turnouts.
Yeah.
The current Labour government was elected by less than 1 in 5 eligible adults in the country. People really, really hate politicians. And I know, for example, you support PR. Do you not think under PR, the two existing and extraordinarily unpopular parties which have totalised the political spectrum in Britain would just fall to pieces if people were given the option to vote for different parties that could actually take power? Because at the moment they're pressured into voting for either one or the other, essentially.
So you are making the case for PR. I don't accept that if you had PR, as they do on the continent, that the pressure on the two main parties is going to be so great that people are automatically going to vote for parties that are inexperienced and in some cases maverick parties. The polls would suggest that nobody's going to get a 50% again, like 1952. That's not going to happen. But if we don't have a single party government, we're going to have a coalition, and that's why in answer to your previous question, I would prefer to have a coalition of progressives than a coalition of the right. In a sense, although there are several parties, and that is how politics has changed over the last 40 years, although there's several parties, there's actually two strains of ideology, to the right and to the left. But there are various options as to where you go to on the right and where you go to on the left.
KCC elections are on May the 1st, and there's 7 Swale seats being fought for. Reform is targeting 5 of them. How much chance do you give them for winning power at County Hall?
Well, first of all, thanks. I didn't know they were targeting 5.
That's my information.
So that's very helpful. I suspect they're the ones in Sittingbourne and Sheppey.
Well, the ones I understand they're targeting is the 2 at Sheppey, Sittingbourne North, Sittingbourne South, and Swale West.
Yes,
yeah.
Of course they would be. Look, I really hope they don't, and I would expect everybody to think that I would say that. But the polling evidence is otherwise. There is good polling evidence to suggest that they are in a strong position. They are spending shed loads of money on direct mail letters, which get round I believe they get round the electoral expenses because they are not mentioning the candidate. But I think there's certainly been one letter from Mr. Farage to all postal voters, and I believe there's another one going out. So in terms of being able to spend more money than everybody else, they have obviously got a chance. Sittingbourne, Sheppey, Swale has been an area that, when it wants to, leans to the right quite strongly. UKIP used to do very well. Reform are nothing more than UKIP reconstructed with a few BNP people to support them. So there is a strain of support there anyway in our area. They came very close in the general election. They were only about 1,000 behind Labour in the general election, and clearly the polls suggest that we have slipped since the general election. That's not surprising, and they have gathered. I understand most of the support they're gathering is from the Conservatives, unhappy Conservatives switching to Reform rather than Labour. But it is some Labour, but probably 4 times as many people switching from Conservative to Reform, if they are switching.
It's very difficult to call, and even all the parties are sort of saying that even Reform are saying privately that they don't actually know what the result's going to be. Most of the time, you can go into these things, you got a pretty good idea, but they don't know how well they're going to do, because they don't know whether they're going to get their vote out. That's the other thing.
Well, my prediction, if you want one, is it'll be incredibly low turnout. Incredibly low turnout. And the turnout will be predominantly people with postal votes. That is why they're sending out letters to postal voters.
Well, you think even lower than the sort of local government average of like 35% turnout?
Oh, much lower. Yeah, it normally is lower, actually.
It's normally about 30 to 35%.
Well, yeah.
For county council.
Not in our area, it's about 29.
Is it? Okay.
30, but I think it could be low 20. Partly because people are being asked to vote for something that's going to be disappearing quite quickly. But also it is this general malaise with politics. And you can get quite a lot of people to say in a poll, yeah, I'll vote for reform. Getting them to a polling station is a lot of matter.
Well, that has been mentioned by the Conservatives, and they've done extensive polling. And whilst they're picking a lot of the 100% behind Nigel and reform, they're voting. They can tell, obviously, by the addresses that they don't actually vote in elections on some of in many of these cases, and that's going to be perhaps the deciding factor as is the postal vote, and the postal votes tend historically to favour the Tories
in different places.
Yes,
I mean we've got wards where they favour Labour because we've done the work picking up. But yes, by and large they do because of the age demographic.
Yeah,
probably, and that's why if you try and interpret county results, you've got to be aware that the age demographic is going to be older and probably more conservative than from others. Regard some people as non-voters. We've got it all on our records. They never vote. But they voted in the referendums, the Brexit referendum. Some of the people who never vote.
So you're talking about that motivation,
They might possibly think, well, Reform is saying what I want to hear. This time I'll go out and vote. And I think a great virtue, and I'm doing it because I don't normally do it. I think that's possible.
There's a lot of talk of political decline. People say the calibre of politicians isn't what it used to be. We used to have parliamentarians making these, stirring speeches, and now they're sat there reading off their iPhones and that kind of thing. Obviously, you've seen many politicians come and go. Do you think there's any truth to that? Do you think politicians are worse at speaking and generally less competent now than they used to be, or?
Right. Well, the first thing I'd say is that my experience is that politicians today, MPs and councillors, do far more work than they did when I started. You had MPs then who hardly ever visited their constituencies. MPs now are regarded as people that have got to take up all kind of issues, and councillors likewise. There are differences between some and some, but generally they are harder working. And my experience too is that they are well-meaning. They want to do some good. It's probably not very political to say that maybe it reflects a little bit on the electorate, not just on the politicians, that people don't want to vote. A lot have got into the mindset that they're consumers. And if no party gives them 100% of what they want and agrees 100% with what they believe, I'm not voting. I'm disillusioned.
Is that why do you think the wheels appear to have fallen off the Labour government so soon after the election? It's always this constant desire for instant gratification.
Well, yes, and also perhaps we're not getting the good things we are doing across, or Labour aren't actually, managing to get people to understand that growth is happening, inward investments happening, money's going into the health service, waiting lists are getting smaller, energy sustainability is being pursued, the water companies are being pursued. The Prime Minister, in my view, is doing quite a good job of handling the difficulty of international difficulty of being with Trump and Putin. So there's quite a good story to tell, but ask anybody, they'll say winter fuel allowance.
Exactly. Yeah.
And maybe they didn't handle that very well. In my view, that it was quite right to make it a means tested, but maybe they didn't handle it very well. One of the problems with the Labour Party always is that they've lost so many elections in the past where they thought they were going to win, and so they're absolutely putting everything into the general election. Then they won it. They hadn't done enough preparation for government politically. There's quite a lot. The missions are there, the policies are there, but the political messaging that you need to do, I suspect that they are catching up.
You mentioned earlier sort of a sense of general malaise with politics that expresses itself. But you did say there was a general malaise with politics and politicians.
I accept that.
But do you think the Labour Party or any existing party actually has the equipment and is equipped to fix it out? The union movement has fewer members in it than it used to. The Labour Party has, I think now, just under 400,000 members, and that's what passes for a mass party in a country of 70 million people. Yeah,
so it's quite hard to campaign, and it's quite hard for everybody to campaign because of the lack of human resource. That's why I've been out walking the streets leafleting when I shouldn't be doing it any longer. So that is an issue. But a lot of people are clued into politics through social media. Some of it's very unfortunate, but they are. You have listeners, so people are aware, but they just need perhaps a little bit more inspiration. And I'd like to hear some politicians saying something original and not just repeating.
Me too.
Because that is what puts people off. Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? And that actually turns people off. And we still are trapped into, partly because, as we mentioned earlier, you mustn't look as though you're divided on anything. So you get people saying things that they don't really mean, but they have to do that because they're in that this or that part. That doesn't help politics at all. But it doesn't help when you get stories of people betting on the general election result. That's appalling. And it feeds into, they're all in it for themselves. Well, as I said earlier, I don't believe that. Every politician I've known, near enough, has been quite genuine.
And lastly, so I understand you're looking at moving out of Kent in the sort of near future. You've been a pretty major figure in Swale politics for a while. How do you like people in the local political scene to remember you?
All right. I got things done. That's one thing. And listen to people. Christy and I often drive around Sittingbourne and Sheppey, and she says, well, you did that, and you did that, and you did that, and it's actually true. And so I would hope I'd made some improvements. People in Sittingbourne and Sheppey are not always keen to acknowledge you've done it, but I feel that we've done quite a lot.
Roger Truelove, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
As previously mentioned, Kent Online published Robert's special investigation this week about how much Section 106 cash is being kept by Medway Council. First question, Rob, how long did it take you to get all this information, and what can be done to fix what is a pretty major issue across local government?
Well, this iteration of the story I've been working on for probably about 3 months now. That's because obviously freedom of information requests take a long time to come back. There's a lot of data to sort of organise and put together. But actually, a major help, it probably would have taken a lot longer if it weren't for the fact that somebody I spoke with a lot was a woman called Maggie Francis, who lives out in Rainham, who basically has been working on this for more than 11 years. This because she lived next to a housing development that she thought she didn't want in her area, and fought it on appeal, was unsuccessful, but was given the saving grace that basically the Section 106 money would come and would help her local services. But she said she didn't see any benefit from that. So she's been looking into this. She's talked to loads of councillors, MPs, people from housing developers, officers, all these sorts of people. And we still don't really have a straightforward answer of why this money, in health at least, isn't being used. It's a massive problem across the country. There was a freedom of information request by, I think, the Builders Federation, which found that £8 billion worth of Section 106 funding is held, billion with a B, is held by councils. So it's a massive issue. And I think one of the frustrating things, which I know she talked to me about, and which I totally, it doesn't really make sense to me in the sense of, these agreements offer for very specific things. They will say in the agreement,
they are always linked to some aspect of development, and you can't just take the money and sort of say, okay, well, we didn't spend it on that roundabout, so there we'll give it over to a new footpath or something. It can't be done like that. It has to be specific to the the actual application.
Yes, but within that, there's it literally names the St Margaret's GP, or it names specific spots, and you sometimes go to these GPs and they don't know that this money is available to them. So it's a real complication of, are the places that should receive this funding aware of it? Is the ICB on top of things? The ICB a few years ago,
the care board,
yes,
which looks after these things.
Yeah, used to be the CCG, and from my conversations with them, part of this may be the fact that some work started being done when it was a CCG, and now it's the ICB, and that work's kind of not really gone anywhere. So I think the thing which me and Maggie Francis was talking about was basically the key people I think really who should get on top of this are local councillors, because they should be able to say, right, these are all the places in our area that have been allocated this Section 106 money. I'm going to fight until this money gets spent in my area, because if I don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. For some reason, that just doesn't seem to be happening.
It's quite staggering, really. If Medway's sitting on nearly £20 million, I mean, how much has been lost across Kent? We know that there's £8 billion nationally, and it's just appalling. I get that it's not quite as simple as these houses are being built in Rainham, so we'll give the money to one particular GP, because when the new people move in, they've got the right to choose to register with whichever GP they want or wherever there's a place. But is it really that complicated? I mean, if Medway Council told the people moving in, right, we've given the Section 106 money to Dr. Smith at your nearest practice, and they've taken on a new GP, aren't you going to automatically register there because it's going to be the easiest place to go, especially if you were guaranteed a space? If the council said, right, the people who move into these properties are going to go top of the list, you're going to go there, aren't you? You've got the NHS schools and the community centres, they're crying out for this money. And the longer it's left unspent, the more expensive projects are going to become, and you're just going to get stuck in a circle where you're chasing the fact that the money that you've got in the 106 agreement isn't going to pay for the project that you want it to go towards.
And often the money set aside isn't enough to cover the work by the time it's ready to go.
Yeah, exactly. I know it's not that simple, but when you have houses being built on your doorstep and people moving in, you need those extra services provided immediately. Immediately they've put the key in the door. Not in 10 years' time. But it's just shocking.
Yeah, sure. Dan, I was going to say that, do you think that maybe some of the problems with this is that there are too many people involved in these decisions and how they're implemented? Do you think that once we've got local government reform and down to sort of 3 unitary authorities with a mayoralty above it, that somehow will become streamlined and quicker?
In theory, yeah. Hopefully, the simplification of local government, part of the reason why it's so touted is that it will simplify the lines of authority and responsibility and concentrate the authority for distributing large amounts of money, a small number of councils. But I think the problem is that the different converging sets of regulation and tendencies which have led to the point where you have projects crying out for investment, millions upon millions of pounds sat there waiting for investment, and the two never meet. It's basically it's a feature which bedevils the British state everywhere as regulation for its own sake, regulation which begets regulation, and it's the enthusiasm for cutting the public sector and the idea of basically dispersing the political authority required to say, here's 10 million quid, it goes on that project, has in fact contributed to a system where you now have, on any given project, any given pot of money, you have God knows how many different agencies who are responsible for regulating the distribution and spending of the money, and to spend any money because state capacity has been so conclusively hollowed out since basically the days of Thatcher. For the state to spend any money, you have to do all these expensive market tendering processes to ensure that it's basically all market optimal. So, and hopefully simplifying local government will make this kind of thing less likely, but I don't think the British state is any less prone to these tendencies than it has been.
Okay, folks, that's your lot for this week. Thanks to Rob, Nikki, Dan for their contributions. And don't forget to keep an eye on KentOnline/politics for the latest news across the county. You can also sign up to our Politics Briefing newsletter by visiting kentonline.co.uk/newsletters. And don't miss KMTV's Politics Show every Friday at 5 p.m. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Kent Politics Podcast. Don't forget to check out stories throughout the week on the politics page of Kent Online. And you can watch the Kent Politics Show on KMTV every Friday at 5 p.m. or on demand at kmtv.co.uk.
This has been an I Am Listening original podcast. For more information, head over to our website, im-listening.co.uk.